The morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of Forrester Creations, casting soft patterns across the mahogany conference table where two men, father and son, sat on opposite sides, divided not by distance, but by decades of unspoken pride. The hum of sewing machines from the atelier below usually filled Eric Forrester's heart with peace, but today the sound only deepened the ache pressing against his chest. For years, he had built this empire with his own hands, molding fabric and vision into an art form that defined Los Angeles haute couture. Yet now, as Ridge stood before him, full of authority and certainty, Eric felt a quiet fury rising inside him, a sense that his life's work was being taken from him before he was ready to let go. The argument that morning began as so many of their recent conversations had, with love disguised as reason and concern disguised as control. Ridge spoke with calm logic, telling his father that it was time to rest, that Forrester Creations needed new energy, new leadership, a direction that reflected the future rather than the past. But Eric, weakened though he was, met every word with defiance. "You think I don't know my limits?" he wanted to shout. "You think I've become obsolete?" But pride sealed his lips, forcing him instead to mask his pain behind a brittle smile. Every heartbeat felt like a war drum, but he refused to surrender. Not to his illness, and not to his son's well-meaning pity. Ridge, for his part, was not the villain of this story. His heart ached each time he looked at his father and saw the tremor in his hands, the pale cast to his once flawless complexion. He was terrified of losing the man who had taught him everything, the man whose name had built their dynasty. But his fear had twisted into something else, something more desperate. Control. If he could convince Eric to step down, to delegate his power, maybe he could protect him. Ridge believed he was saving his father from himself. He didn't realize that Eric saw it as betrayal. The tension between them had been growing for months, spreading like a hairline crack through glass. Small disagreements turned into long silences. Polite discussions became sharp exchanges. Brooke tried to mediate, pleading with Ridge to be patient, with Eric to rest. Donna, ever devoted, hovered anxiously at Eric's side, watching him fade day by day, but knowing that nothing she said could stop his obsession with work. To Eric, Forrester Creations was not just a company, it was his identity. Without it, he feared he would simply disappear. That afternoon, the storm finally broke. The meeting was supposed to be routine, reviewing the latest collection, finalizing the upcoming fashion showcase, but Ridge had come prepared to draw a line. He entered the office with determination etched across his face, clutching a file that symbolized his father's future, or rather, the end of it. As he spoke, his words carried a precision that cut deeper than he intended. "Dad, it's time. You've done enough. You've given the world more than anyone could ask. But you can't keep pushing yourself like this." The silence that followed was deafening. Eric's pen, poised above his sketchpad, froze midair. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, and the fury in his eyes was something Ridge had never seen before. Not youthful rage, but the anguish of a man who feels erased. His voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp. "You want me to stop being who I am," he said. Ridge tried to explain, tried to soften the blow, but Eric's pride had already fractured. "I built this house," Eric whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he gestured toward the glass walls and the logo that bore his name. "Every stitch, every show, every dream. You think I can just walk away?" The argument escalated, each word an open wound. Ridge's frustration boiled over, his tone rising despite himself. "You're killing yourself," he shouted, the words echoing like a curse. Eric's reply came not as anger, but as heartbreak. "Then let me die doing what I love," he said, voice cracking under the weight of truth. That sentence hung in the air like smoke, impossible to escape. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Eric's expression shifted. His hand clutched at his chest, eyes wide with sudden pain. Ridge froze, disbelief giving way to terror. The pen fell from Eric's grasp, the sketchpad slipping to the floor. "Dad," Ridge called, his voice trembling as he rushed forward. But the moment was already spiraling out of control. Eric's body convulsed, his breath caught, and then a collapse that seemed to happen in slow motion. Ridge caught him just before he hit the ground, the weight of his father's body crumpling against him. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but time had already lost meaning. Ridge knelt on the floor, holding his father's limp hand, whispering words he couldn't remember, promises that meant nothing against the stillness now settling over the room. Brooke arrived moments later, her scream breaking the sterile quiet. Donna sobbed uncontrollably as Ridge whispered, "It's my fault," over and over again, the phrase becoming a mantra of guilt. At the hospital, the world blurred. Doctors moved around them, murmuring phrases Ridge couldn't comprehend. Massive cardiac event. No response. Time of death. Each word struck him like a hammer, shattering pieces of his composure. When the final pronouncement came, Ridge's legs gave out beneath him. Brooke caught him, tears streaming down her face, but he barely felt her. The man who had been his hero, his rival, his measure of greatness was gone, and Ridge could not escape the thought that his last words had killed him. The days that followed were a haze of grief and self-recrimination. The media hailed Eric's death as the passing of a legend, the end of an era in fashion history. Photos of him filled magazines and television screens, smiling, commanding, immortal. But Ridge couldn't look at them. Each image was a dagger, a reminder of the man he had pushed too hard. He replayed their final argument endlessly in his mind, searching for the moment he could have stopped, the word he should have left unsaid. He remembered the look in Eric's eyes, hurt, proud, defiant, and it haunted him. The family gathered at the Forrester mansion for the memorial. The house felt colder without Eric's presence, as though even the walls mourned. Brooke spoke softly, holding Ridge's hand, reminding him that his father had lived fully, that his passion had defined him until the end. But Ridge couldn't accept comfort. He saw the way everyone looked at him, their pity, their silent accusations, and he agreed with them. He had forced the conversation, had provoked the argument, had watched his father's heart give out under the weight of it. Late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Ridge wandered into Eric's study. The room was just as he had left it, sketches scattered across the desk, glasses resting beside a half-finished design. The air smelled faintly of cologne and old paper. Ridge ran his hand over the desk, tracing the outlines of his father's last sketches. The designs were bold, filled with energy, proof that Eric had still been creating, still dreaming. "You weren't ready to stop," Ridge whispered. The tears came again, quiet and relentless. In the weeks that followed, guilt became Ridge's constant companion. He returned to Forrester Creations but found that the building no longer felt like home. Every meeting, every decision carried the echo of his father's voice. Sometimes, he thought he could still hear Eric humming softly as he drew, or the faint clink of his cufflinks as he adjusted a sketch. But those were ghosts, reminders that brilliance and love often coexist with unbearable pain. Ridge began to confide in Brooke, revealing the depth of his torment. He admitted that his intentions had been good, that he had only wanted to protect Eric, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "I pushed too hard," he said one night. "I wanted him safe, but all I did was take away his dignity." Brooke's eyes filled with tears, but she told him what she believed to be true, that Eric's death had not been caused by Ridge's words, but by the relentless will of a man who refused to let illness define him. Ridge wanted to believe her, but belief was fragile against the memory of that final argument. The fashion world moved on quickly, as it always does. There were tributes, retrospectives, collections inspired by Eric's legacy. Forrester Creations continued under Ridge's leadership, but the weight of the company felt different now. Each decision seemed heavier, each triumph tinged with sorrow. Ridge often stood alone in the design room, staring at the empty chair that had once belonged to his father, wondering if Eric would be proud or disappointed. One evening, as Ridge prepared to close the office, he found a sealed envelope among his father's sketches. Inside was a handwritten letter, Eric's handwriting, elegant and unmistakable. The message was brief but piercing. My son, don't let the guilt destroy you. We fight because we love. And if my time comes during a fight, let it be known that I died doing what I was born to do. Carry the name with pride, not with regret. Ridge sank into the chair, the letter trembling in his hands. For the first time since his father's death, the tears that came were not from guilt, but from release. The pain would never disappear. He knew that, but perhaps he could learn to bear it differently. Perhaps Eric's final lesson was not about fashion or legacy, but about love, the kind that burns fiercely, imperfectly, until the very end. And so, when Ridge returned to Forrester Creations weeks later to unveil his first collection since Eric's passing, he didn't try to outshine his father or reinvent the brand. Instead, he designed a tribute, a collection filled with subtle echoes of Eric's classic lines, reimagined through his own vision. The finale piece, a shimmering white gown embroidered with gold thread, carried a hidden inscription along the hem. For my father, who never stopped creating. As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Ridge stood in the wings, staring at the runway that had once belonged to Eric. He could almost see his father there, smiling that quiet, proud smile. The pain would always remain, but in that moment, Ridge finally understood. Love and guilt, creation and loss, were threads of the same fabric. And as long as he kept designing, as long as he honored the fire that had driven them both, Eric Forrester would never truly be gone. The December light poured through the glass walls of Los Angeles, soft yet deceptive, illuminating the contradictions that define the lives of those who moved within the elegant yet treacherous world of the bold and the beautiful. On this particular Thursday, December 4th, love and legacy collided once again in quiet rooms and crowded hearts. Eric Forrester stood defiant against the slow crawl of time. Ridge wrestled with the burden of responsibility, and Deacon Sharp found himself caught between redemption and temptation. Beneath the glitter of couture and the veneer of perfection, every gesture carried an echo of longing, pride, and fear. A reminder that even the most glamorous lives are built on fragile foundations. The morning began at Forrester Creations, where the hum of creativity filled the air. Assistants hurried with sketches, seamstresses whispered over fabric, and cameras clicked in the background. Yet within Eric Forrester's private office, there was no harmony, only the quiet tension between father and son. Ridge stood by the window, his jaw set, his words carefully measured, while Eric leaned against his desk, the weight of his years hidden behind practiced elegance. Their conversation began gently, the way old arguments often do, before unraveling into something raw. Ridge spoke from concern, his tone heavy with love disguised as logic. He reminded his father that the world had changed, that it was time to slow down, to step away before work consumed the last of his strength. He recalled the health scare from 2 years prior, the sleepless nights and hospital machines that had nearly silenced the Forrester patriarch for good. Ridge's plea was simple: rest while there's still time to enjoy life. But Eric, whose entire being was entwined with the art of creation, bristled at the suggestion. To him, rest was not peace, it was surrender. Every stitch, every design, every shimmering gown that bore his name was a testament to survival. He had outlived rivals, scandals, and heartbreak. To stop now would be to admit defeat, and Eric Forrester had never been a man who bowed to the inevitable. His voice, though calm, carried the unyielding steel of pride as he told Ridge that he still had something to give, that his mind burned with ideas too vivid to ignore. When Ridge insisted that the company needed new direction, Eric's composure cracked. "You're not in my position, Ridge," he snapped, his words trembling with the fury of a man who feels the world closing in on him. "You don't know what it's like to look in the mirror and see your own son waiting for you to fade away." The outburst stunned Ridge, leaving him momentarily speechless. For a flicker of a second, he saw not a father but a man terrified of becoming irrelevant. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the things they had never said, the admiration buried beneath resentment, the fear masked by pride. Ridge wanted to explain that his intentions were pure, that he only wanted to protect the man who had taught him everything, but the moment had passed. Eric had already turned away, staring out the window, his reflection fragmented by the glass, like a man divided between past glory and an uncertain future. Across town at Il Giardino, Deacon Sharp was trying to convince himself that he had finally found balance. The restaurant smelled of roasted garlic and aged wine, and laughter drifted from the patio as Hope and Deke Sharp arrived to spend time with their father. Hope's smile was cautious, Deke's demeanor protective. Both carried the quiet worry of children watching a parent tread too close to danger. Deacon greeted them with open arms, his charm easy but strained. He had promised himself that this reunion would be peaceful, that he would avoid the one subject guaranteed to shatter it, Sheila Carter. But fate, as always, had other plans. Hope and Deke exchanged knowing glances, unable to resist confronting the truth. Hope's words were soft but edged with fear. She reminded her father of everything Sheila had done, the chaos she had brought into their lives. Deke was less restrained, demanding to know how Deacon could possibly forgive a woman whose name had become synonymous with destruction. Deacon tried to explain, to make them understand that love isn't always logical, that sometimes redemption is found in the most unlikely of people. But even as he spoke, he knew how hollow it sounded. He wasn't blind to Sheila's darkness. He had simply convinced himself he could save her from it. The conversation soured quickly. Hope stood, her chair scraping the floor, her voice trembling as she said she couldn't watch him ruin his life again. Deke followed her out, leaving Deacon alone at the table, the untouched wine glinting under the light like a quiet accusation. When he finally lifted his head, he caught sight of Sheila in the corner, watching. Her expression was unreadable, part affection, part warning. Deacon rose to meet her, his movements slow, the weight of his choices pressing against him. Their conversation was brief, but charged, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. He told her he was trying, that he wanted peace, but Sheila's smile was knowing. Peace, she said softly, isn't something people like us are built for. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the city, Deacon found himself standing outside Taylor Hayes' office. He hadn't planned to visit her. It just happened. He told himself he needed clarity, someone to talk to, but the truth ran deeper. Ever since that night at the open mic event, when their eyes had met across the room, and for one suspended moment she had imagined dancing with him, something inside him had shifted. Taylor represented the calm he could never quite grasp, a woman who understood brokenness but had managed to transform hers into wisdom. When she opened the door, surprise flickered across her face, followed by that gentle warmth that always seemed to undo him. Their conversation began innocently, about work, about coping, about redemption. But as they spoke, something electric stirred beneath the surface. Taylor's voice softened as she reminded him that change takes time, that forgiveness must start with oneself. Deacon's laughter came bitter and self-deprecating. He told her that people like him didn't get happy endings. She met his gaze steadily and told him that maybe he was just too afraid to write a new story. The silence that followed was charged, the space between them humming with unspoken attraction. Deacon stepped closer, his words barely a whisper. What if I don't deserve a new story? Taylor's breath caught, but she didn't move away. In that suspended moment, the air thick with possibility, both knew that desire had already crossed the line that reason tried to hold. Meanwhile, at Forrester Creations, Ridge stood outside his father's office long after the argument had ended. He could still hear Eric's voice echoing in his mind, sharp and wounded. He wanted to apologize, to take the words back, but pride held him frozen. When he finally entered, Eric was gone, having retreated to the design room where he often sought solace among sketches and memories. The atelier was dimly lit, filled with half-finished gowns that shimmered under the soft glow. Eric stood before a mannequin, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted a seam. His reflection in the mirror was that of a man fighting his own mortality, each breath a quiet act of defiance. As he worked, his thoughts returned to Ridge's words. "You've done enough." The phrase stung. What did it mean to have done enough? For Eric, there would never be enough. Creation was not something he did, it was who he was. To stop designing would be to stop living. His chest tightened, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the lines of the fabric, the way it caught the light, the way it whispered of elegance and endurance. Yet somewhere deep inside, he knew he was losing the battle. Back at Taylor's office, Deacon sat across from her, struggling to make sense of what he was feeling. He wanted to touch her, to bridge the space between guilt and grace, but fear held him back. Taylor, ever the healer, saw the turmoil in his eyes and recognized it, because she had lived it. Their conversation drifted toward loneliness, the kind that lingers even in a crowded room. Deacon admitted that despite everything, despite Sheila, despite his past, he still believed in connection. Taylor smiled sadly, telling him that belief itself was a form of courage. When Deacon finally rose to leave, their hands brushed, and the world seemed to tilt slightly. Neither spoke, but both understood that something had changed. As night descended on Los Angeles, the storylines of these lives intertwined in invisible ways. Ridge returned home, weighed down by regret. Eric sat alone in his studio, staring at the final sketch he would ever complete, a breathtaking gown that embodied both defiance and grace. And Deacon, driving through the empty streets, thought of Taylor's eyes and the promise of something pure, even for a man like him. The next morning, everything would shift again. Ridge would find Eric unresponsive at his desk, his sketch still clutched in one trembling hand. Hope would wake to find a message from her father, short, apologetic, uncertain. And Taylor would stand by her window, replaying the moment that almost happened, wondering if she had been wrong to believe that redemption was possible. In the world of the bold and the beautiful, every love is a gamble, every decision a reckoning. Eric's pride, Ridge's guilt, Deacon's yearning, and Taylor's restraint all dance to the same haunting rhythm, the human need to be seen, forgiven, and remembered. And as the curtain falls on that December night, one truth remains: beauty fades, power shifts, but desire, the endless, aching, redemptive kind, never truly dies.